Hey everyone, this is James here, bringing you another Italian genre film review. Today, going to be continuing the Sergio Martino Giallo run. Going to be reviewing all five, as well as Suspicious Death of the Minor, whether you count that as a Giallo or Poliziotteschi or both, as I do. So going to be reviewing all six of those, six films that are all quite good and that I do enjoy quite a bit. So just going in kind of chronological order, already talked about The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. Highly recommend that film, highly recommend people check that out. This is a spoiler-filled video, so just as a warning, going to be discussing kind of the movie in a little bit more depth. So if you want to see this film without the spoilers, I would definitely recommend this film, and you should go watch it, and then you can come watch this video later. So a quick synopsis about the case of the Scorpion's Tail. Woman travels to Athens to collect her life insurance after her much older husband's death, where she is immediately stalked by others interested in the money. So again, these are Giallo, and a lot of these have really labyrinth-type plots. So you could describe this in much, much greater detail. For me, at least, I prefer the simpler sort of synopsis. So that's what I went with here. So similar to Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, this is a Italian-Spanish co-production. It was released just half a year later, I believe, in August of 1971. So in this big golden age of Giallo, 1971, 1972 are kind of the big years there. Talked a little bit about that in that Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward episode. And so Martino, like Argento, released two in this year. Two of which I think are both pretty solid. For me at least, Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward is absolutely top tier Giallo. This is probably whatever category you would put just beneath that. Definitely well above average. And in fact, this film is probably one of the least seen of the five different Giallos that Martino did during this kind of short period from 1971 to 1973. The others being Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, All the Colors of the Dark, Your Vice is Locked Room, and Only I Have the Key, and Torso. I kind of think if he had just done one or two, this film would be held in a little bit higher regards. Just because he did so many, this one can kind of get lost in the shuffle. And in fact, when I did a episode ranking his different Gialli, I actually ranked this one fifth. Even though I really like this film. And it's just less seen. And I don't think that necessarily, I think anyone that's interested in Giallo would get a lot out of this film, especially fans of the genre. I think it has a ton of the different genre trademarks and things like that that just keep us coming back for more. So I don't see any reason why this film should be lesser seen than something like All the Colors of the Dark, for instance. So Martino did a lot of Golden Age Giallo, and all of them are distinct and different. He didn't necessarily repeat himself too. So another reason you should definitely check out this film. Should and want to watch it? Yes, it's a beautifully filmed mystery set mostly in Greece. Okay, so let's get into the film a little bit. So another reason why I think this film is probably a little bit less seen than the other Martino Gialli is it lacks kind of that big signature face, the person that a lot of people consider kind of the queen of Gialli, and that is Edwidge Fenech. And instead, she's sort of replaced with a combination of Ida Galli at the beginning and Anita Strindberg for the last half to two-thirds of the film. And it's an interesting choice because I think Fenech definitely would have fit in as probably the Strindberg role, but really she could have been the Ida Galli role as well. Nevertheless, I think those actresses are definitely up to the part, and I think they're both quite good in this film. Strindberg in particular was coming off quite a run here where she was in Lizard and Woman's Skin. She appeared in Your Vice is Locked Room a year later. She was in the other great Giallo, Aldo Lotto, Who Saw Her Die, and she was Tomas Million's unfortunate girlfriend in Almost Human 2. So she only has something like 23 film credits or something like that, but she's quite good and appeared in quite a lot of films, quite a lot of good genre films during this kind of period in the early to mid 1970s too. And I think she's good here, even though if she's not kind of the big draw that someone like Fenech is these days for these Giallo films. The other thing that really strikes me of the film is kind of the protagonist and the person you're being attached to and sort of following throughout the film. In Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, it's very clear. In fact, it's even in the title. You are following Mrs. Ward. There's a lot of Edwidge Fenech in that film where you are just following her place to place to place. And it's very clear who is kind of like the character and emotional center of that film. This film really, really lacks the center. There's a little bit of Psycho in it, where we have kind of Ida Galli, who initially seems to be the focus of the film. We're following her around, and it's something like 25 to 30 minutes in that it pulls the Psycho, and it kills her. And it's quite shocking and well done. So good job by Gastaldi, the screenwriter here, as well as Sergio Martino for doing that. And it really is a really, really nice misdirect. And from that moment on, the film kind of really lacks a center. And I say this in kind of a good way. And Psycho, Hitchcock famously did this, and I think it's one of the more distinctive things that stands out. And it's one of those moves that's a little bit difficult to pull off, but I think Martino does a really, really good job here. So we sort of get attached to the George Hilton character, who is basically the insurance investigator. And then eventually you have Anita Strindberg sort of take the Ida Galli place, but it's not necessarily 100% straightforward there, too. I really like how that is done. And the lack of center in the film feels very... I don't know, it just kind of gives the whole film a little bit of a kind of this decentered, destabilized feeling. We're not sure who is who. In fact, you are a little bit suspicious of George Hilton character. He's one of the chief suspects throughout. And indeed, at the end, he is proven to be the killer. So in some ways, you are following around that killer around. You just don't know he is the actual villain in here. And so one thing, I mean, this is my third time viewing the film, so of course I knew that George Hilton was going to inevitably be the killer in this film, is I noticed that Martino cuts to him often when there are these different kind of stalking events or murder events that are happening throughout the film. And it's a really interesting way to show it, because in some ways he's sort of clearing him and making you think he's innocent. In fact, it's really, really nice sort of misdirection cinema. So I think in that sense, Martino and Gastaldi do a good job of kind of like really kind of shifting your focus and not thinking he's the actual killer, when in the end, he's the obvious choice, and he does end up being the killer at the end too. Another thing that I noticed that is quite different, I watched Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward last week, I watched this one this week, is that this one is influenced by Argento a little bit, just in the sense how it amps up the gore. In fact, it's considerably more than Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. The murders are well filmed, and they're filmed with good visual stylishness, and perhaps a little more slasher elements than the more straightforward Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. So there's more blood, stuff flows, there's a mean-spirited to it as well, and I quite like that. Another couple things too, similar to Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, as well as a lot of the Gastaldi Gialli. This one kind of has that mid to upper class jet set lifestyle where people are moving around. There is some really, really beautiful shots of Greece in this. In fact, it really makes me want to travel there. Martino was allegedly, he said he was inspired by this, so there's no allegedly about it. He was inspired by the film Z, the Costa Gavras film from the late 60s, which is a really, really terrific political thriller. That film has a lot more to say about politics, but I think you can see a bit in the style. Costa Gavras has a really kind of... It's a style of filmmaking that's become very, very influential, almost like this photojournalist that's really fast-paced. There's kind of like a rhythm to it that moves really, really quickly. And I think this film in particular is perhaps the breeziest and easiest to watch of the Martino Giallis. It's just really, really fast. In fact, he actually had to pad it a bit and add a little bit more footage of London, otherwise he would have been dealing with something like a 75 to 80 minute film. So I really don't feel the length of this. I think it moves really, really well, and is paced very well indeed. There are comedy moments, like a lot of these different films, that help to keep it a little bit on the lighter end and also fun, as opposed to going full into kind of like the mean-spiritedness of the film. Of all the Giallo films done by Sergio Martino, I would say this is probably the best showcase for George Hilton. He's really great in this. So, as I talked about, we keep cutting to him when we have these different kind of killings and things happening. That seems to clear him. But he does a good job of kind of portraying like someone that is allegedly just kind of looking into these crimes and things like that. but also kind of having that two-faced psychopathic thing at the end. And Strindberg and him in particular have really good chemistry, and we can see sort of the fear in Strindberg's eyes when eventually she does get cornered in this really great conclusion of the boat. So there's a lot of fear and vulnerability there. So like I said, I think she holds up really, really well. In fact, I think if you put Fenech in this role, she'd probably do fine too, but I don't know that she's definitely an obvious upgrade over Anita Strindberg, which might be a little bit of heresy. I also like in this film how we sort of have the three big investigators here. So Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward also had three kind of men at the center. In this case, not all of them are collaborating or bad, but we have the George Hilton character, who's playing the insurance investigator. We have Luigi Pistilli, who was also in a ton of great genre films at the time. And we also have, I keep on calling him Alberto Di Martino, which is not the right name for him, but Alberto de Mendoza, who is playing kind of an Interpol agent here. And so all of those guys are kind of, especially the Di Mendoza character, can be a bit of a red herring. Especially because if you've seen these films, you have it in your back of the mind that it could be kind of a minor character like this. And he kind of came out of left field in The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward to be a collaborator there too. And you also know the way they're cutting to George Hilton that if he is the killer, there's going to be a collaborator. And in fact, we do find out eventually that there is a collaborator, which is why they can keep cutting to him. It's the some sort of person working with the plane system. Of all the four major Giallo directors, Sergio Martino is definitely kind of the one that adapts himself and shifts himself more, which from kind of an auteur perspective, it's a little harder to analyze because he's not going back to these same sort of motifs and things like that. Argento really, really forces himself into a mold in terms of like he's such a talented visual filmmaker, but it's clear that he has strengths and weaknesses, and there are things he likes and he doesn't like, and there's no one quite that can craft a kill scene like Argento does. Martino will change genres a lot. He worked in a lot of different molds. I think personally he's most well suited to the Gialli, but he was a good Poliziotteschi director. He directed some good spaghetti westerns, and he directed some other good films that are outside of those genres as well. And so I think as a result of kind of, I don't want to exactly say a softer touch, because everyone that talks about Martino says that he had very clear ideas of what he wanted to do. He was just more willing to move with the material and adapt with it and give it kind of a different thing, different spin, depending on what he thought it deserved. So as a result, this film feels very, very different from Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, which has like this kind of big, gothic tenseness to it. This is like breezier. It's shorter. It feels shorter. You have this great kind of tropical island finish, which is kind of the opposite of the kind of gothic castle-like settings that you have in Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward too. So someone that was really willing to switch kind of his directorial style depending on the actual material. Ernesto Gastaldi, I think, is correctly being celebrated as kind of the big signature screenwriter of this period. And he worked mostly with Sergio Martino here, so they can be seen as kind of like big core collaborators as well as with Luciano Martino, who some will even credit as being like the number one because he is bringing all these different forces together. And Sergio Martino, while he is the director, deserves certainly a good deal of credit. There's a lot of collaborators and things like that coming together to make the film what it is. And you'll see a lot of consistency in the Sergio Martino Giallis in terms of who's producing, who's acting, who's directing. Whereas Dario Argento kind of moved around a lot, directed a lot over the course of many, many years, and while he had his father and brother as producer, worked with a lot of different actors and screenwriters and cinematographers, so really, really bounced around a lot. Another key component to this film, too, is the really fantastic Bruno Nicolai score. It's just kind of a top tier Giallo score in a genre that has some absolutely amazing scores, so this one's really, really good. Suits the material very, very well. So the set piece is not quite as big or as tense as Mrs. Ward, except with maybe the exception of the finale and the tropical island. So it doesn't feel as kind of like striking as that film does. Nevertheless, I think this is definitely one of the most watchable Giallo films, period. So probably somewhere in that kind of like next tier, just below the top tier. Who won the film? I'm going to give it to George Hilton, who I think is really good in this film. He's just a fun presence to have, I like it when he's willing to dive into these sleazy roles. So when he actually does make that turn at the end, I think it works really, really well. In fact, the double feature that I have selected for this film is the Luigi Cozzi Late Giallo in 1975, The Killer Must Kill Again, where we get another sleazy George Hilton. Okay, so rating here, I'm going to give this a very, very solid 8 out of 10. Definitely check out this Giallo. I would recommend this to anyone, fans of the genre as well as other people. Gastaldi in particular is probably a good writer to follow as well if you're someone that is really cares about the pothole. So if you're part of the pothole mafia, he's someone that tries not to cheat as much. And so he clearly, from everything, he said this multiple times, he clearly does not care for the Argento Giallos where there's a lot of cheating and things like that in terms of plot. So he doesn't, as a screenwriter, I can tell he does not care for that stuff. Thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this review. I will see you all next time. Cheers.